It can only be attributable to human error.
You're entering paranormal.
He meddled in things that you people. He meddled in
Slug.
things. He meddled in things.
Where will we go next? This phantom from another time.
No one, Mr. Mulder.
That's it, man. Game over, man. Game over.
That is one big pile of shit.
What's up, everybody? This is a special episode of Cryptid Campfire. I have who's beside me?
Alex Daikaiju.
And across the table?
Eli Watson.
And
who are you?
I'm Jasmine With.
Hey!
And on the phone line, we have a very special guest today. We're doing an interview with author and illustrator Carlyn Beccia. Carlyn, say hi to the listeners.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, welcome to the campfire.
So we've brought Carlyn on the show today to talk about her newest book called Monstrous, the lore, gore, and science behind your favorite monsters. I've read through the whole book. I believe Eli has done so as well, and Alex has read some sections too. So we wanted to talk about this book that she has created for a broad audience. This book is a must-have for monster lovers of all ages. So we wanted to kind of give you guys a little information on her book, give a little information on her as an author and illustrator, and talk about these cryptids that she's included in this fabulous little book here.
Well, the first thing I want to say is that the book is fantastic.
Yes.
So
Yeah, it's awesome.
Thank you. Well, you're a monster lover, so you're a little bit biased. with all the
I guess
cryptids
I
in the book.
Bias in all the right ways.
It's very true. So I guess my first question, the back of the book does say that it is intended for monster lovers of all ages, but we do have some kind of hints towards the beginning that maybe this might be geared towards children or people on the younger side. Would you say that that's true?
Yeah, I try to make books that will appeal to all ages, but I would say that this is more of an older book, probably tween-teen audience would be my guess. But, so my kids are really stoic. They don't get scared pretty much anything. Mm-hmm. So I don't want to say, like, yeah, your 7-year-old could read it, because there might be they might be scared by the Godzilla chapter. So I would say use precaution if you have a very young child, and if you have a tween teen, just throw it at them and say, leave me alone.
Throw the book at them.
Yeah, because I'll be honest, when you hold the book in your hand, it does kind of have that children's book feel to it, because it's beautifully illustrated by you as well. I love the detail on all of the pages, even like the table of contents and, the index in the back. There's so much to look at and so much beautiful art. But I looked at it and I was like, oh, I can get through this pretty quick. Like, I'll be able to skim this in like a day or so. It's actually a really hefty book with a lot of crazy, mind-blowing information. Do you want to kind of explain the scientific approach that you take when you wrote this book?
Yeah, so I was a child who, I didn't really gravitate towards science as a kid. I was more a history buff kid. And I discovered this love of science later in life. So I was thinking, how can I trick readers who don't love science at a young age to get them interested in science? And I thought Monsters was a wonderful way to do this. Who doesn't love cryptids and monsters? I mean, there's infinite possibilities, infinite scientific possibilities involved with them. So really, the book is designed to get readers involved in critical thinking, to always ask, what if? And that was my objective, to pose all these what-if possibilities. What if Bigfoot was an ape? What if Bigfoot was an alien? What if, vampires decided to bite your veins or your arteries? Which should they choose? It was all these what-if possibilities for science, future science lovers. I say it's a book for future science lovers and present.
Mm-hmm. And how did you kind of narrow down which monsters and cryptids and creatures you wanted to include in this book? Because you've got different chapters on things like vampires, Frankenstein, Bigfoot, werewolves, etc., etc. But also in the back of the book, you have this big map that you've also illustrated, kind of showing where different creatures are located across the world, and it includes quite a few that weren't talked about in the book. So how did you kind of decide which ones you wanted to include and which ones didn't quite make the cut?
It was really tough, I have to say. The criteria I used for choosing a monster was they had to have a really great origin story. And what I mean by that is they had to be something surprising about the history of that monster that I thought would interest and pique readers' interest. And it also had to fit into a science lesson. So in each of the chapters, there's a little bit of math. I teach about the square cube law and King Kong chapter. In zombies, I teach about neuroscience. In vampires, I teach more about biology. In Frankenstein, it's more about electricity. There's all these science lessons in each of the chapters. So there were certain monsters that I would research for, months and months and months. And then I just felt that they didn't fit into an applicable science lesson, like a base science lesson for this audience. And they would have to get cut. So on that map, those are, and I hate to admit this, but those are all my rejects. Those are all the monsters that did not make the cut. Usually they didn't make the cut, not because they didn't have a great origin story, but because they just didn't fit into this science lesson I wanted to teach.
You can save them for the sequel.
Yeah, hopefully.
Yeah, that's another thing. You were talking about history, too. I learned so much reading this book that I literally, was mind blown every few pages, just learning about the history behind these legends. Kind of like what we do when we research here for Cryptid Campfire, we have this general idea of what these creatures are, but we don't really know where the legends come from or what the facts behind it are. This book has so much information and so much good research. Carlyn, how long would you say it took for you to compile all this research? You were talking about, it would take months and months on one specific creature. So if you had to guess overall, how much time had you spent researching this book?
Well, I was working on another book in tandem with this book, and I hate to admit this one took me 5 years.
Whoa.
I hate admitting that. But yeah, this one took a lot longer than the other. Only because you have to understand, a lot of this research was out of my depth. I'm not a neuroscientist. I'm not an anthropologist, so I had a lot of expert readers reading over the years. And I'm sure you guys will understand this. When you discover that new piece of science or history or folklore that you kind of fall down that rabbit hole. I found myself falling down so many rabbit holes with this book. I joke that it made me the worst dinner party guest ever, because I would go out with friends and I would say, guess what I learned about Neanderthals today and how it relates to Bigfoot. And it was kind of one of those books when I was researching it, I never wanted it to end. I know that sounds hokey, but I think that I drew it out for a reason, because I was just having so much fun researching it.
Yeah, I totally get what you're saying about the not being like a neuroscientist or anything like that, because there's been quite a few times on this podcast where we talk about scientific things, and I'm like, I don't know what that means. You're gonna have to explain that to me. Like, I don't understand what you're saying.
We don't claim to be experts. We're just people looking into this stuff for fun. And I would argue that makes you the best party guest, because I'm always want to hear about Neanderthals. So if I'm at a fancy party and someone's like, hey, you know about Neanderthals? I'm set. Party's got way better.
It's funny you say that, because I've gotten a lot of looks when I started waxing poetic about Neanderthals at dinner parties. Yeah, I guess I'm hanging out with the wrong crowd.
You gotta definitely find people like, hey, listen, I got some cool stuff. I learned all about Frankenstein, Dracula, Wolfman. Who wants to talk about it? Because that's when the party kicks up.
Right.
Definitely. No, this turned me into a reluctant polymath. I didn't want it to, but it did.
Yeah. I wanted to ask, because you do all the illustrations in the book, and they're all, amazing. I just wanted to ask, which cryptid or which monster was the most difficult to draw?
That's a really good question, because they were each challenging in their own ways. I would definitely say the vampires was the easiest, probably because we have so much soft art to draw inspiration from. I think the most difficult one, and this might surprise you, but was probably Godzilla, because there's been so many reiterations of Godzilla, and he's gone through so many symbolic changes that I couldn't. I was like, do I draw Godzilla campy? Do I draw him like fierce and dramatic and scary? Because I didn't know how to capture his essence.
Right.
So I would say out of all of the chapters, the Godzilla one was the one that I struggled with the most because, as you guys know, it's a deeply emotional story, but this is a humorous book.
Mm-hmm.
So he was kind of, he was an anomaly in the sense that he had a very real, I'm saying he could be a she, it had a very real history behind it, and I didn't know how to capture that with being, I needed to be respectful and also keep the same tone of the book. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and especially with Godzilla, because the origin story of Godzilla is very intense and it is drawn from a real-life tragedy, but it's interesting, too, to see throughout, as I'm sure you looked into it, Godzilla changes a lot with the times when the movies come out, and sometimes he becomes kind of more lighthearted, more funny, and then sometimes he gets more serious. And I'd say you did a really good job of drawing him. He looks like Godzilla. There's a few elements in there. I don't know if you used the original 1954, because I see a lot of his influence in there, with a little bit of like the 60s Godzilla thrown in.
Yeah, Alex is a very well-versed fan of Godzilla, so I think
See, if we ran into each other in a dinner party, we would talk all night.
I was gonna say, it's like I'm down to talk about monsters and Godzilla for sure. Like that's like one of my favorite topics.
Yeah, so that was one of the simplest things to struggle with Godzilla is what color to make him.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like what color do you make him? Because he technically is kind of grayish in the original.
Yeah.
Yeah,
he starts off kind of gray, and he kind of becomes more greenish in a little bit. Sometimes like he's even like straight. They make him like straight black almost with like white spikes to really draw the contrast.
Yep. And color evokes a lot of emotion, so he went through many color reiterations. He was scary at one point when I was drawing him. I'm like, this is too morose. I got to change this. So yeah, that was the one I struggled with the most. Bigfoot was definitely one of the easiest ones to draw.
Really? I would have guessed that one would have been the hardest, just because there's so many different ways you can take the look of a Bigfoot, but there's only like so many ways you can get it right that it looks like Bigfoot, but then again, I'm not an illustrator.
I guess with Bigfoot, I had sort of this confirmation bias with the way he looked. I mean, I had this idea of the way he looked when I started illustrating him, and it changed throughout, but it didn't change in a way that the way that Godzilla, like I need to, with Bigfoot, I don't think I could have gone wrong, is what I'm saying. No. There isn't any preconceived notion, like, and no one would look at it and go, that's not Bigfoot. But someone would look at, say, the Godzilla chapter and go, oh, come on, why did she do that? That's not authentic to Godzilla. So there was a little bit of that going on.
I see. But I do want to bring up that Bigfoot chapter, because you've included a lot of cool information in there, especially the Jerry Crew sightings. Or the casts made and how Ray Wallace was the one who hoaxed him, and just that little bit of information just blew me away because that's not even included in a lot of Bigfoot books, but it's in yours, and I just think that's incredibly well done research and very thorough as well, and I just want to applaud you for that. Oh,
thank you, because that research was tough because I had to get it all in one spread. It's in a timeline, so I had to communicate it through images. And I wanted to get the most salient points across, which, people would look at that timeline and go, oh, you forgot about this Bigfoot event, or you forgot about this Bigfoot event. And it's the challenge of an author-illustrator. You have to decide what to include to communicate to your reader the whole depth and breadth story. So if I left anything out that readers feel like I should, definitely send me an email and it will go into the second book. But I tried to include the points that I thought were sort of the turning points in the Bigfoot timeline. Right, and I think you do that very well. Because, I mean, we just did an 8-part series on Bigfoot, trying to go as best... I listened to it. It was awesome.
Okay, thank you.
Whoa.
Whoa.
I never believed, I wrote a page in the book about the Bigfoot is an alien. It was sort of tongue in cheek, but after listening to your podcast, I was like, I don't know. I should have listened to this podcast before I did my research, because maybe, just maybe, he is an alien.
Yeah, you never know. Or
you never know.
Dare we say an interdimensional window faller?
Oh, Lord.
Real quick, did you have a favorite episode of the Big Part series?
I guess I would say the alien person, only because whenever I listen to something, and I've researched this for so long, and I have my own preconceived notions of Bigfoot that are kind of hard to change at this point, just because I'm so ensconced in the subject. If I listen to a podcast that the research after I've already done my research, and it makes me go, that's actually possible. That is what kind of moves me.
Another thing that you include in the Bigfoot chapter, which I thought was really great, was how to make a cast. Yeah, because that is so important for Bigfoot research, and nobody talks about
evidence.
it.
Yeah.
And you just go into detail, step-by-step process of how to make a cast, and I think that's awesome.
And readers need to get some scat too.
Yeah. But always use gloves.
Someone get some real scat, like not deer poop, not.
Still on the Bigfoot chapter 2, I like how throughout the book you kind of compare these cryptid creatures to the real life versions of either their ancestors or relatives. Like, for example, you've got a whole page on how to survive a Bigfoot attack, but at the bottom it says, please note these tips can also be used to survive grizzly bear attacks. So this book isn't all just hypothetical. Her book includes real life tips and tricks and knowledge about wild animals. There's a lot of information in the werewolf chapter about how to avoid actual wolf attacks and how to react and present yourself if you come face to face with one. So I think that's really cool as well.
And you do the same in the werewolf chapter as well, with
Yeah, and so every chapter ends with survival tips for each monster. And, it's funny that you bring that up, because I really did that more for younger readers. I was the type of kid that I was scared of everything as a child. And so I thought about myself as a child and monsters. I love monsters, but I was so terrified of them. I wanted to address monsters in a contained way. And I think talking about monsters and giving a plan for surviving monsters is empowering to children. It says, all right, so zombies might not exist, but let's say, for example, if we did have a pandemic or an epidemic break out, here's what you can do. Bigfoot may not be real. You might run into him in your backyard, but if you did, here's what you should do. And by the way, this is also what could happen if you run into a grizzly bear at a camping trip. You should do these same techniques, and same with werewolves. Obviously, wolves communicate much like dogs. Here's how you befriend a werewolf. So it was sort of a tongue-in-cheek way to get kids not scared of common things in their environment through an uncommon way, if that makes sense.
Yes.
Yeah. So, we kind of went over, the Bigfoot episode, the Bigfoot articles, or the Bigfoot section, was really good. The werewolves,
sorry.
Oh, you go for it.
King Kong falling. That is something I've always wondered about, because King Kong is one of my favorite films, but I couldn't help. There's that last shot of the movie where they show him on the street and there's a crack in the ground.
Yeah.
But I'm I don't know, he fell a really long way.
Yeah.
And you kind of answer that question, and I think that's awesome.
When did you see that movie? Did you see that movie as a kid?
I did.
Original?
I saw the Peter Jackson remake, and I was 7 years old when that came out.
Okay, so you are my ideal perfect reader. Because I think there's a lot of kids who would look at that and go, oh yeah, King Kong fell, and there's a big crack in the sidewalk. But I want readers to look at that and go, oh my God, he's a huge, humongous monster who defies the square cube law. If he's going to fall, then that's not going to end up with a crack in the sidewalk. So I want kids to start thinking about, and I guess adults too, what would happen if King Kong was to fall from the Empire State Building? It certainly would not involve a crack in the sidewalk.
We got to get the special edition that shows what scientifically happens when he does
Oh
fall.
my lord.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
this book, it's kind of like a great book for us specifically because Eli and Alex are both like big old school horror movie fans, and like we obviously have a podcast about cryptids, and this book brings all of those things together so well. Like you even talk about cinematic history, like the way that these creatures were portrayed in the movies, and like the whole history of where they came from and the science behind how they would work if they did exist. And it's like, it's pretty crazy, and I'm really glad that we ended up connecting with you and we were able to get our hands on this book and kind of just be enlightened by all this information.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. I kind of, not to get too philosophical, but I always feel that monsters and monster fears are a reflection of our culture at that time. And we see that with trends. I mean, I think we're in a big cryptid trend right now. And I think that's because we're asking a lot of why questions. We're having that sort of existentialist debate, maybe because it's due to politics or, you know, what's happening in our world. But you see monster trends changing. There was this big vampire trend 10 years ago, and then before that it was werewolf. So it's interesting. I actually think that would be a great podcast idea to talk about cultural trends of fears and why they're applied to certain time periods.
That is very interesting.
Oh, yeah.
That's actually something I kind of try to look at more of the cultural impact of certain cryptids rather than the cryptids themselves. So that's actually something, that's a really cool idea. I might look into that.
Because those fears are kind of a reflection of where we are in our society. So we're scared of different things for different reasons.
Yeah, I mean, you even addressed that. There was the one section about, I believe it was for Bigfoot, about Neanderthals and the cave people and how it's like, oh yeah, you know, there's the fear is what keeps, you know, the human race going, you know. The fearless cavemen are the one who get eaten, you know, because they're like, I'm going to go out there, I'm going to fight a saber-tooth. But, you know, the ones who are afraid are the ones who live to fight another day. So it's interesting, you know, how fear kind of plays into a lot of just human nature.
Yeah. I talk a little bit about this in the book, but I always feel that if you look back in history, some of our moments of the most poignant fear, humans act out in horrible ways. Horrible. So I think that would be an interesting discussion for your listeners, that, you know, if you look back at some of the most horrible periods in history, what movies were happening during those times, what books were happening in those times, like how could monsters and cryptids be a prognosticator to those incidents that happened? I mean, not a definitely lighthearted subject, definitely more.
Oh no, that's like I said, that's like best dinner table content.
And now we're like, let's do a deep philosophical discussion about cultural fears.
So I guess we start kind of doing final questions.
Yeah, does anyone have any final questions? Or Carlyn, is there anything that you'd like to ask us?
I've been listening to your podcast for a while. I want to know how you guys all got together.
Oh.
You all know each other? I mean, like, because it's way better when you're interviewed by three people than when you're interviewed by one. It sort of feels more like you are at a party, just discussing cryptids.
Yeah, kind of round table panel discussion.
Yeah, I think that's where your podcast succeeds, where others might not be as interesting. So I'm curious of how you all met.
Well, first of all, thank you. That's awesome to get that feedback from someone who's been listening. The three of us actually used to work at the same movie theater. We all had the same job at the same place, and we were kind of acquaintances when we all first met. It took a while for us to kind of warm up to each other. I mean, none of us were ever like, oh, I don't like that person. But, like, you know, we were just coworkers. We were in the same space.
We're three very unique weirdos in our own ways.
Yeah.
I don't think I talked to Alex for like the first year at the theater. I was like, that guy's just weird.
Yeah.
Look at me now.
Yeah, but the podcast started because Eli and Alex kind of had been just having random conversations about cryptids and things like that. And then they ended up, you know, I think, what was it? You guys were just like, we should have a podcast. And then you just did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Isn't that how the best ideas come about, where you're just, you know, at the party one night, and we're like, you should do that, and then you actually do.
Yeah, you just
Yeah.
kind of
The
dive
actually
into
doing
it.
part that's tough, though. A lot of people don't do that.
Yeah, it was a rough start. I mean, they had the idea, and then they were like, hey, we should bring on a third person, and for whatever reason, they decided to ask me, and, here we are now, but it was a rough start. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know where you started listening to us, but please avoid the first few episodes because they're really bad.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
It's funny, all podcasters say that, and I will listen to them. I'm like, I mean, to me, it's not that. I mean, it's still interesting to me, but
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
It is funny to go back and listen to the old ones and be like, wow, look how far we've come. We've improved so much.
We'll be like, who are these people? Like, I'm like, I don't remember that. It's not us.
that's awesome. Well, that's way better than going back and going, God, we were so brilliant.
Oh yeah, what happened? We dropped.
So you're in definitely in the right direction if you feel that way.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
I had a just a quick couple questions. It's gonna be all about Godzilla because that's like my favorite thing to talk about. Did you watch a bunch of Godzilla movies, or did you just do a select few to kind of get a feel for when you were starting off?
So I confess, when I started researching the Godzilla chapter, I had never seen the original 1954 movie.
Okay.
Ever. Yeah, I mean, I came into this not being a Godzilla fan at all. And there's a reason why it's the last chapter of the book. It is my favorite chapter, and I was insistent upon this with the editors. I'm like, no, change the order of the chapters. Godzilla has to be last. And I think those are the monsters you fall in love with the most because those are the ones that catch you off guard. There was so much history, and when I was researching the Godzilla chapter, especially about nuclear fallouts, because I was the child that I was terrified of nuclear fallouts as a kid. And when I started researching this and all the tips that you could do to survive that, and reading the eyewitness accounts of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and then what people actually thought about the movie, that to me was riveting because I would watch this movie and I was like, wow, this is really poignant. And then you hear, that Japanese audiences are leaving the theater in tears. This is so very real for them. But then you see all these reiterations. So I have to confess, when Godzilla got like really campy, I started to tune out somewhat.
For sure.
So I'm not maybe a diehard Godzilla fan, but I am in love with the original movie.
Yeah.
And the story behind it.
That's awesome. Yeah, the original's really good. Yeah, it is interesting following Godzilla because it starts off very serious, and then, there's been plenty of essays and books written about it in a better way than what I'll say, but, it addressed a lot of, cultural trauma that happened, and then I think when they addressed it, they kind of got a little more, they took Godzilla in different directions. We're like, well, now, what else can he be? Because, I think he was kind of like a healing, I think he kind of helped heal a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I think, talking about monsters and fear, I think it makes us develop our empathy towards people. I know I'm taking it on a philosophical end.
Oh, no,
but
that's great.
No, that's awesome.
That when we confront our own fears, we can understand the fears of other cultures, and that makes us have developed more empathy for people. So, and I think Godzilla is exactly that. He's a monster that makes us feel. So he's a little bit different in the sense like vampires and werewolves, they follow this sort of linear path. Godzilla branches out into so many different emotions. I was, just to give an example, I was amazed by, I didn't know when I started researching this, and you guys probably already know this, but the story behind the bikini.
Yeah.
It's just fascinating to, here's something that's steeped in patriotism for Americans, but it came out of a tragedy, and it's such an innocuous piece of fashion, but it came out of this tragedy.
That was definitely an interesting section. Like the bikini. Nowadays it's just it's what people wear at the beach, but the history behind it, how we got to that point, is very, very wild, and I definitely think that saved that for the book because there's a lot of good history, a lot of things. I mean, we're not experts, But after reading this book, I feel confident that I could walk up to strangers and just be like, hey, listen, I gotta tell you some stuff about the history of monsters.
Yeah.
You see what I'm trying to do? I'm the worst dinner party guest ever, and I just want to make other people
I do not
like that
validate
too.
that claim at all. I think you're the best dinner party guest from what I've heard so far.
My greatest hope is that after reading this book, you'll sit down at the dinner table and be like, how can you tell the difference between vampires and a dead person? Let me tell you about decomposition as we eat our dinner.
Mm-hmm. Well, it has been absolutely fantastic talking to you, Carlyn. I am so thankful for the time that you've spent on the phone here with us. If people want to order your book or look at your art or learn more about you, where can they go to get that information?
Well, I just started using Instagram. I'm kind of a newbie with it.
Hey.
So they can they can follow me on Instagram. And the book is in all major bookstores across the country.
Awesome.
Nice.
And if they wanted to order it online, could they do that as well?
Yeah, it's Amazon, Barnes & Noble. Of course, support your independent bookstores, too.
That is a good fact.
Yeah,
that is true. I appreciate that. So thank you so much for calling in and letting us have the opportunity to talk to you. It was great getting to know you. I was a little bit nervous. This was actually the first interview that we've done with a guest on our show. So thank you.
I was surprised you guys were going to have me because it's not your usual format.
Yeah, so
all the time.
So thank you
Change,
for
adapt.
thank you for breaking us in and giving us this experience. I think it went very well.
Yeah.
And,
I mean, not to toot our own horn, but I think we did pretty great.
and
You guys did. Best interviewers ever.
Hey.
not that we have anything to compare it to, but you've been the best guest we've ever had.
Yeah. Straight
And
from
you know what?
Cryptid
You will
Campfire.
not get to a point where you look back at your old podcast and go, remember that awful author we had as our first guest?
No,
I don't think
never.
that'll be the
Way
case.
since then.
Well,
That won't happen, I promise you.
well, I guess we will go ahead and sign off then. I am Jasmine With from Cryptid Campfire. To my right, we have...
Alex Daikaiju, also of Cryptid Campfire.
And across the table again...
Eli Watson.
And we have just spent a lovely time talking to author and illustrator of the book Monstrous, the lore, gore, and science behind your favorite monsters, Carlyn Beccia.
Thank you for having me, guys.
Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. Thank you very much.